Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today I want to do something a little bit different and hopefully something that can be of service to the community in general. I want to do sort of a Knives 101 or introduction to knives type of video, and this will be primarily about folding knives, and it'll be primarily directed to those of you who are looking to pick up a knife to carry and you just don't really know what you're looking for. So that means for those of you watching who are regular viewers, regular subscribers, contributors, there's probably not a whole lot new that you're going to learn here. Okay, but this video may be a useful tool for you. So when you're having that conversation with your friend or neighbor and trying to encourage him or her to carry a knife, and you think, well, how am I going to even get all this data across that they sort of need in order to make a good decision? This video can be helpful. All right, it can also be helpful to someone who's new to the hobby, new to the community, and wonders what people are talking about when they use different terms, talk about different locks, all those kinds of things where a person who's a new initiate is kind of going, what are you even talking about here? Okay, so that's the purpose of this video. I hope to be, I hope to have a little bit of fun with it. I hope to fill in some gaps in your knowledge if you're new to the hobby, and to just have a generally helpful discussion. What I would say to you, if you're a regular contributor, if maybe you're a knife maker, maybe you know tons about knives and steel, and you're, a great, machinist and you're a metallurgist, put some comments down below so that the comments on this video can serve as a resource as well. All right, let me say one more thing by way of introduction, and that is this. I'm not going to rehash the videos I previously done about, recommending a good EDC knife or recommending a good hard use knife. I will put links to those in the description or possibly add them as cards depending on what I feel like works better as I'm editing this. Okay, so you can, if you just want a list of good EDC knives, I've got a couple of videos about that. If you just want a list of a good hard use knife or outdoors use knife or tactical knife or something, I've got lists like that. So you can go watch one of those videos. This is more for someone who's new, and maybe they even, this would be a good video to watch before. If you don't know much about knives, watch this video first and then go and watch some of the recommendations, and you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about, and you'll be better equipped to assess my recommendations to see kind of how they would suit your particular needs. All right, so the first thing I want to say is my primary view of a knife is as a cutting tool. All right, so every knife, no matter what its purpose, there are lots of knives that are designed for, I don't know, survival or to be a tactical knife or whatever the case may be. But my primary expectation is that a knife will cut stuff. And if it doesn't, I'm not going to appreciate it, and I'm certainly not going to recommend it as a reviewer. Okay, so and look, as a viewer here, as someone getting into knives, I would recommend you do a similar thing. Can a knife serve as a survival tool? Can it serve as a weapon? Can it serve as, something to split wood with? Well, yes. Okay, but those are not primary purposes. And here's the challenge for that. A lot of people who start off, and they want something crazy and big and heavy duty like this AD10, which I love. This is one of my favorite knives in the whole entire world. It's just fantastic. But for the average person, they're probably not going to love this all that much. They're going to want something that's a little more suited to being carried all the time, number one. And now this will cut like crazy. This is a great cutting tool, all right, but it's pretty heavy duty, and so probably not for everybody. And this one doesn't make my list of, I don't know, best EDC knives. It probably makes my list of best hard use knives, okay? So I know that there are lots of other purposes that a knife can work at. It may have a pommel that can serve as a hammer or a glass breaker, okay, but that's not my primary consideration, okay? It may have a grip that's got really, really strong traction to serve as a weapon if it was ever needed in that way, or have, be designed specifically to be held as a weapon for some martial art. The fact is, for most people, that's not a knife you're going to appreciate long term, because you're not, hopefully you never ever use your knife as a weapon, but you will have to use your knife as a cutting tool 10 times a day. All right, so I'm going to lean toward the thing that I need for 10 times a day rather than the thing that I need barely ever. All right, and so that's my first thing is to recommend that you view a knife primarily as a cutting tool. And I didn't always do that. I think I've told you the story about the Recon One and how I was so impressed that Navy SEALs carried it, and I just had to have one. And I've learned better since that time. Okay, so the first thing that I want to go over with you, and I'm going to get some of these knives out of the way. Actually, I'm going to get all of them but one out of the way. Is let's just do a quick discussion of the parts of a knife. Okay, so obviously we know blade and handle, but it generally gets a little more detailed than that when we're thinking about, you know, exactly what we want our knife to do. So let's start off with the blade, okay? And of course, so here's the blade. We have two bevels on here, okay? So here is the primary bevel. That is, this has been ground at an angle so that we can get down to a thinner cutting edge. And then the cutting edge itself is ground again, okay? So that's the secondary bevel. All right, so primary bevel, secondary bevel. We have the spine of the knife over here, the tip, the point. Okay, so those are all parts of the blade, and hopefully you can remember that. If you need to go back and watch this a couple of times, that's fine. Remember, I'm going to be pretty general here, so I'm not going to talk about blade shape and blade grind. That'll be for a different part of the discussion. Back here, we have what's called the plunge grind. That is where the grind starts coming into, remove material here to begin to create our primary bevel. All right, we've got a sharpening choil. That's this piece that's removed so that you can sharpen right to the heel of the cutting edge there. All right, that's the heel right here where my finger is. This area here of the blade is called the ricasso. And I think that pretty well wraps up everything we want to know about a blade. Now, this choil, that is this material that's been removed, is to serve as a way to allow you to sharpen this knife. There's a different kind of choil which would be larger that would fit your finger. So I'll show you before we move on. Here's an example. So this choil is larger so that my finger can fit in here, and that's now a finger choil rather than a sharpening choil. All right, you can see as well that we have very different ways of doing a plunge grind. Okay, and you're going to see a number of different variations here. Also, you can see that we have some similar features, and we can find all the same stuff. So we've got the spine, primary bevel, secondary bevel. Okay, we've got a different blade shape here. We'll talk about blade shapes in a second, but there's the ricasso, there's a top swedge, which normally we wouldn't label, but anyway, I just wanted to give you that one other example before we move on. All right, now let's carry on down the knife. This portion of the knife is called the bolster. All right, obviously this is the handle, this is the bolster, this is the pivot. So this whole assembly here is called the pivot. You might just refer to the screw in this, and that would be, of course, the pivot screw. Now, just keep in mind that not every knife has a bolster. So here's a knife where the handle is just all one material. No bolster on this knife. This one has a bolster, as you can see. All right, you may have, on older knives especially, a bolster at the bottom of the handle as well as the top. All right, here we have a kind of a choil cut out. This, of course, is the spine or the back of the handle. And here, so this is a folding knife. All right, and so the tang of the blade is down here. You can see it inside the handle. On a non-folding knife, on a fixed blade like this, the tang of the knife is this piece of metal that comes through inside the handle, and this is a full tang. All right, we'll talk about this when we get to knife handles in a little bit. We start talking about handle materials and those kinds of things. Okay, we've got a lanyard hole right here. This piece here that holds the two scales apart, or the two liners apart, is called the back spacer. Clip is over here. And let me grab a different example where the different parts are maybe a little more easily identifiable. Okay, so on this knife here, this is a Wrap Model 1, we have a handle scale, we have a stainless steel liner, we have these standoffs inside. That's a different way of doing the same job as the backspacer does. And then we have another liner and another scale, and there again is the clip. Okay, so if I'm talking about a stainless steel liners, that means these two things in here, the liners inside of the scales. The scales here are sort of the covering. All right, That's what we're talking about. These would be standoffs versus a backspacer. Okay, now that should pretty well cover every part of the knife that we need to be concerned about. So now you'll have some idea when a reviewer like me or your friend or neighbor or something is talking about different parts of a knife, you'll at least have a handle on what those parts are and what all that stuff means. Okay, let's now move on to blade shape. And I've actually got a little printout here that's going to help us with this. All right. Rather than me spending inordinate amounts of time pulling out a bunch of different knives, we can just kind of look at, and I want you to focus primarily on this side, okay? So we have a normal or straight back. We have a clip point. Now, by the way, the clip may not always be this aggressive, okay? So this is also a clip point, even though it's much less sort of rounded. If this is really long and rounded, we'll often talk about that as a Bowie point, but it's still just a variation of a clip point. All right, they show this as a drop point, and this is a drop point as well. Again, just to show you, it doesn't have to be that aggressive. All right, this is quite pronounced. This isn't so pronounced. All right. Next, we have a spear point, and a spear point just means, I don't have an example, I don't think, of a spear point here with me, but a spear point, as you can see, it just means that this side of the knife, that is, here's the cutting edge and the spine of the knife, they kind of match each other, and it ends up looking like a spear, right? So if you envision a spear, that's what it looks like. Now, on a spear point, it's important to notice the back here, the back of the spine of the blade, all right, is not sharpened. When we move down to a dagger, now we have two sharpened edges, all right, so a little bit different there. We've got an American tanto. Now, they call this a Japanese tanto. A Japanese tanto is normally like this. You may also see this blade shape. So if we have same knife, but this coming down here and extending longer, you'll sometimes see that as well, called the Japanese tanto, just to kind of make sure you're fully aware. All right, we have a kukri blade shape there. Trailing point, hold on. A trailing point, this will also sometimes be called a Persian blade shape, and I think you can see why. You kind of know what culture that background comes from. Then we've got a talon. A needle point, we're not really going to spend much time on, but a sheep's foot and a Wharncliffe, okay, you will see these pretty commonly. Spay point, you're mostly going to see in traditional folding knives. A Deo blade and Nesmic is not really something that most people just getting into knives that don't have a very specific purpose in mind are going to be super, super concerned about. All right, so let's carry on a little bit further and talk about some blade grinds. So let's see what examples I have here before we get to my next little sheet of paper. Okay, so here we have one blade grind. This is a flat grind. So that is a flat surface has been put against here and ground. You can see that it's if we looked at it this way, actually, let's just get the paper out and I'll show you on the knives in a second. So there's no grind. So this would be a piece of blade stock that had not been touched yet. Here's a hollow grind. So this starts at the top and actually grinds out. I'm going to exaggerate this down below. So, right, so there's a very exaggerated hollow grind. It's actually material has been removed. All right. Here's a flat grind. Okay, so that's like the knife we were looking at a second ago, the Rat Model 1. Here's a saber grind, and so here, this is kind of an example of a saber grind. I say kind of, it's not a perfect example. Perhaps this would be a better example. Okay, saber grind does not have to be flat, by the way. Chisel grind, okay, that's where we've only removed material from one side. And finally, a convex grind. Now, they didn't put a Scandi grind on here, and a Scandi grind is going to be, by the way, let's see if this shows. It does. Okay, so notice how we can identify here primary grind and the primary bevel and the secondary bevel. Okay, on a Scandi grind, we would have the same thing happening, but it's ground down to nothing. There's no secondary bevel. It's called zero ground. Okay, it's ground right down to the point, and that's supposed to improve ease of sharpening and the ease with which this cuts into material. Okay, so you can imagine, um, and here's a couple of things I want to talk about here. When we talk about how well something cuts or slices, okay, that what matters there is how much of a wedge effect we're getting. All right, so imagine, okay, I'm going to push this blade through material. So I start pushing in and I'm cutting through something. Well, whatever I'm cutting through has to be pushed apart to this dimension, okay? Now imagine same material, but now I've got to cut with this blade and push it through to a much thicker dimension. All right. And we've got lots of different examples. This one's sort of in between the two. This is a Wee Knives Malice, and it's sort of in between the two. But again, now what matters, okay, is first of all how thin that knife is behind the edge. So look right here, back on my sheet. A hollow grind, look how little material. So if I imagine that I was going to cut these words in half, okay, look how little material I'm moving through that medium for such a long time, right? It's all the way up to about here before I start to get even a similar dimension to the flat grind. All right, so unless you're, how do I say this? In most cases, that means that a hollow grind is going to cut the nicest, the easiest. A flat grind is going to be second. And by the way, consider though that you could narrow this quite a bit. Okay, so this flat grind could be super narrow. And on a kitchen knife, you'll often just get this secondary bevel and then straight up. So super thin blade stock and just this secondary bevel. Well, that super thin blade stock means you're hardly moving anything through the material. Okay, so cutting performance has a lot to do with three sort of factors. Okay, one is how thin is it behind the edge? How much am I initially having to push through whatever it is I'm cutting? Secondly, how fast or slowly does it thicken up? So a very thin knife is going to slice a little better than a knife that's really, really thick, although it's going to be a little more easily damaged. Okay, it's going to be a little more fragile. However, a thicker knife, all right, now here's why I like a hollow grind. Okay, a thicker blade is going to be a little stronger, not quite so easy to break, but it's not going to slice as well. However, I think if you take a thick blade stock and give it a nice hollow grind, you get the best balance of those two worlds. Now, not everyone's going to agree with me on that. That's a little bit of personal preference, and you can learn that with experience. I would recommend trying it. Get some of your kitchen knives out at home and see how they all feel as you cut through different materials, and that'll help you sort of make that choice. Here's an example of a blade that's very thin blade stock with a flat grind. Okay, so even though I like the hollow grind better, these two knives are going to cut fairly similarly. In fact, this one's going to cut a little bit better because I'm moving so much less material through whatever medium it is I'm cutting. Okay, so last thing I have to say about this, we didn't really touch on this a whole lot, so let's come back to it for a moment. A convex grind represents something a little bit different yet. Instead of a hollow grind, okay, it goes out and it allows you to do something pretty cool. It allows you to get a very fine apex, okay, and this one is 0 ground, which I think is a good option for convex grinds. So this allows you to be very, very fine at the tip so that cutting into material is very, very easy, but all the way along this primary bevel, you've got more material. So this is another way of doing what I was suggesting with a hollow grind, of trying to balance toughness and cutting ability. And we could debate which one is better, and they're really better for different purposes. For everyday carry tasks, probably either one is going to be fine. If you're doing a lot of food prep, you'd probably want something very thin like this. For general cutting tasks, I think the balance is best struck by a hollow grind. Others will prefer the convex grind. Now, I will say a convex grind is going to be most often found on a fixed blade knife. Okay, so Now that we've gotten all that stuff out of the way, let's move on to the next point on blades. And I know this is getting a little long. I kind of knew it would be from the beginning, so please bear with me. The next point I want to talk about is the steel. All right, I think most of us probably have an understanding that, whatever blade grind, whatever shape, there's some difference being made by the steel choice that this knife is made out of. So this one is D2. This one is, I can't remember. I think it might be M390. Let me see if I can find the label. It's always a bit of a mystery on WE knives. They like to hide it. Yeah, I can't remember. This one is LC200N. This one is S30V. You can see all those labels. Now, one thing I will say, just as a general rule, if you don't see a label anywhere on your knife, except for, there's an exception, but if you're at Walmart looking to buy a knife and you find one that doesn't have any label on the blade steel, that's a pretty good indication that they don't want to tell you, okay? The other similar thing that people will do is the blade may be marked surgical steel. All right, well, surgical steel is just another way of saying, crappy no-name steel. All right, the exception to that is, you may have noticed on this knife when I had it out earlier, that there's no clear label on the blade. That's because this is a mid-tech knife. It's made by a custom maker, and that custom maker will tell you what the blade steel is, okay? Or when you buy it from someone else secondhand, they'll tell you what the blade steel is. So that's a bit of an exception. But there are differences in steel performance, and this is going to be very general. So here's what I would like to do. I'm going to suggest, and I'll put a link in the description. I know I'm going to put a lot of links down there. That's the nature of a video like this. Okay, I'm going to put a link to Cedric Nada Gear and Outdoors. Pete has what he calls a steel roundup, where he categorizes so many different steels that it's ridiculous, and that'll be a much more in-depth discussion than what I can give you here without making this video 3 hours long. Okay, so let me start by first saying, yeah, if you're at Walmart and you go to pick up a, I don't know, Gerber knife or something and it doesn't have the blade steel on it, there's probably a reason for that. They don't want you to know what the blade steel is. However, if you're at Walmart, you'll probably find some of the knives labeled with a couple of different labels that I'm going to call decent, cheap options. So we're going to start with, these are cheaper options that are still okay. All right, and those are 8CR13 MOV, 440C, 12C27N, OS8. You might see 9CR14 MOV, still kind of falls into this class. Those steels, and there are others that we could talk about, but I'm going to try to keep this list a little bit simple, okay? But those steels are sort of lower tier. They're fairly budget friendly, but they're going to be decent performers, okay? The next level, which I'm going to call cheap but good steels, okay, are steels that don't cost a lot, but are going to outperform that previous list that I mentioned and actually do a pretty good job for most people. In fact, all of these steels are going to do a pretty good job for most people. All right, so cheap but good, I'm going to list 14C28N, D2, OS10, 9CR18 MOV, 154CM, and again, there are other steels that we could list, but I'm not going to, we could go on and on and on. So I'll refer you over to Pete's video on his steel roundup, which is really good. Now, moving into the next sort of the top tier, actually before we move into the next tier, I do want to pick on a couple of steels that I don't tend to like or recommend. Not that they're not good steels, but I usually find they're in knives where the knives are charging a little too much for what they are. All right, so VG10 and N690, they're decent steels. Okay, they're not super steels, but you'll sometimes find them on knives that are priced as if they have very premium materials and very premium steels, but they really don't. Okay, so VG10 and N690, they're not my favorite steels because I find generally the knives that have them are a little overpriced. All right. Finally, what I would call high-end steels. I'm not going to break this down further into sort of high-end and super steels. I'm just going to list a bunch of good steels that you're hard to go wrong with, and those would be 154 or CPM 154, CTS XHP, which is my favorite out of this list, CPM S30V, CPM S35VN, S1 CPM S110V, CPM 20CV. That all stands for carpenter powdered metallurgy. Okay, Bowler M390, CTS 204P, S90V. All right, and there are more. LMAX, there Slepner. There are a bunch of other steels we could name. I'm not going to get into every single one of them right now. Again, I'll refer you over to Pete's video where he goes into all the steels and really lays them all out in some detail for you. Now, the one thing I have to say is fixed blades, you're going to see sort of a different set of rules, okay? Let's just way oversimplify this and say folding knife steels are often geared toward edge retention, okay, because the assumption is you're carrying this every day, you're doing a bunch of cutting, you want that edge to last as long as possible. Fixed blade steels are often geared toward toughness and durability because the assumption is you're taking this out in the bush and you may be pounding on it, hammering it, you may be prying stuff with it. So instead of going really hard, these steels will often dial back the hardness, okay, and that's achieved by heat treatment. So they will dial back the hardness in favor of toughness and durability. And so you'll get a steel that's a little springier, that can take a beating without, breaking or bending or rolling. So, and very, very briefly, and I'm way oversimplifying here just for the sake of time, a really hard steel will be more likely to chip or break. A really soft steel will be more likely to flatten or roll. On the other side of that, the very hard steel is going to hold an edge longer. The softer steel is going to not hold an edge as well, but it's going to be harder to break. Okay, now I know I'm oversimplifying, all right? But remember, this video is not meant for, someone who has been doing this for years and knows everything about knives and knife steels. It's just meant to be sort of a general overview. Okay, guys, so thinking of blades, we need to talk about one more thing, and that is no matter what steel you choose, no matter how good the grind is, no matter how thin it is behind the edge, every knife is going to get dull eventually, and you're going to have to sharpen it. And so one of the things I would say you ought to spend just as much time on as watching my videos and learning more about knives is sharpening. So, I'm not going to go into great detail. This is not going to be a sharpening tutorial or anything like that. There are other places to go for that, but I will just grab a couple of sharpeners here. This is the Spyderco Sharpmaker. It uses these diamond rods that lock into a particular angle so that you can hold the knife. The camera's in a horrible place to show this anyway, so I'm not even going to try. But this is a fixed angle sharpener. It works very well and will suit most people's needs quite nicely. The other option I have here is the WorkSharp Field Sharpener, and this is one I've had for a while, and I really like this. In fact, I carry it in my EDC bag all the time, and I can't tell you how many times this has helped me out. So the bigger point here is I don't care which sharpener you pick. Well, I do a little bit. Don't pick a crappy pull-through sharpener or something like that. Lansky has a rod system that is about the cheapest one I'd recommend. It's like 19 bucks. This Spyderco Sharpmaker is probably for most people going to suit all of your needs. This is what I use the most, probably about 90% of the time. A couple of times a month, I might pull out my Edge Pro Apex or my WorkSharp belt sharpener. But most of the time, these two, this one if I'm in the field, this one if I'm at home and can set it up, and very, very effective. So take the time, learn how to sharpen your own knives. It's not hard to do. I would recommend watching Jay Davis videos if they're still around. Maybe they're gone already, but there are a few different videos out there that can teach you how to sharpen. Talk to a friend, talk to a neighbor who is into knives. And take that time to learn how to properly sharpen your own knife rather than having someone else sharpen it. After all, who knows, we could end up in a situation like now where we're social distancing and it's not so easy to just take whatever item you want sharpened off to wherever you plan to get it sharpened. You could be kind of stuck at home and need to fend for yourself. So learning how to sharpen for yourself is very, very important. It'll also help you in future purchases. So the next knife you buy and the next knife after that, if you're sharpening them yourself, you will learn more about those steels and how they feel and how you like to you know, anyway, it'll give you a feel for, steel hardness, what you like, what you don't like. And so overall, if you're going to be a knife guy, if you're going to just own any decent knives, it's worthwhile to know how to sharpen. So wanted to add that in there. Sorry about the break here, but I recorded this at a different spot and wanted to move it. So thanks a lot. Back to the rest of our discussion. Okay, next, since we've got a fixed blade here, let's talk about lock types. Okay, so most of the knives, in fact, all of the knives I've shown you so far are locking knives. That is, they have some mechanism, other than this one, they have some mechanism that when you open the knife, the mechanism moves into place and locks the knife so that now I can't just go and close it. I've got to do something. In this case, this is a titanium frame lock. I've got to move this lock bar over, that gets out of the way. So again, I'll show you this really slowly. So you can see this lock bar has popped over and now it's in the way. It's keeping the blade from closing. So I've got to move it over before I can close the knife. Okay, the idea is that keeps the knife from closing on my fingers or closing at a time when I don't want it to. And there are lots of different options here. Let me just quickly run through some of them. All right, we have the Rat Model 1, which is a liner lock. So that is, here's those stainless steel liners we talked about before. Part of this liner has been cut so that when I open the knife, part of the liner pops over. Now it's in the way of the blade tang, and I can't close the knife unless I move it out of the way first. Okay, there you go. Next up, since we've already looked at it and you got a bit of an introduction, let's talk about a frame lock. So again, I open the knife. You can see this is making up the frame of the knife. The lock has been cut out. And when I open it, it pops over so that now I can't close the knife without moving the lock bar first. All right, I've got another example of that. This is the WE Knives Malice. Okay, there you go. You can see again, let's show you a little bit slower here. So as I open the knife, there's the lock bar. It's going to pop over into place. And now it's keeping me from closing the knife because that lock face is hitting the blade tang and not allowing it. So I've got to move it over to close it. All right, while we're here, I'll just take a quick look. There's a detent ball in there, and this knife has something that I'm generally going to want to see in a frame lock, and that is a little piece of steel inserted at the end of this titanium lock bar. And that puts steel interfacing with steel because we don't want this to wear out unduly. So titanium is softer than steel, and that lock face would wear prematurely if it didn't have the lock bar interface like it does. Here's another example. Titanium moves up, and if you take a look right in there, you can see a little piece of steel that's interacting with the blade tang. Next up are lockback knives. Now this is a particular kind of lockback called the triad lock, but lockback knives are pretty common. It's probably what you're used to seeing if you don't have a lot of knives, if you're not used to this. And a lockback knife just has some little way of pushing down a lever here. And if I open the blade up, you can see there's a big cutout here. All right, so what's happening is I open the knife, that lock bar falls into that cutout at the back, and now I can't close it. All right, lockbacks are quite good. They're not quite as fun to fidget with, okay, because they're not, a frame lock or a liner lock tends to be a little more, I don't know, put a little less pressure on the blade when it's opening, so I can sit here and flick this open and closed over and over again. I can, the knife blade will fall shut. And some people really, really appreciate that. All right, there are a few other types of locks that are worth noting. This knife has a compression lock, and I'm not going to get into a full discussion of that. That would be another 10 minutes. But in this case, the liner stops the blade from closing by dropping into a little gap that's there and getting between that part of the blade tang and the stop pin right there. So this pops over, now the blade can't close. It is not the same as a liner lock, but the leaf spring does a similar thing. Finally, of course, there are knives with no locks at all. Hold on. My soft fingernails hate these kind of knives. So this is a slip joint. It doesn't have a lock. Okay, what it has is a spring that you can maybe... No, you're not going to be able to see it functioning here. But this has a spring inside that helps to keep the blade in the handle and helps to close it when you want it closed. Okay, so By the way, there are multiple other lock types. I'll just give you one example. This is a pretty new lock from CRKT. This is called the bolt lock. This is not a common lock. In fact, you're only going to find it on CRKTs. It's proprietary to them. Pretty cool lock design though. So just serving as an example that perhaps you're going to find other things that I haven't talked about. Okay, let's bring in a bunch of stuff now and talk a little bit about handles. So obviously, a knife is more than just a blade. A knife needs that blade to be attached to some kind of gripping apparatus. Okay, we call it a handle that allows us to maneuver the blade where we want it. And excuse me, those handles are, there are a million different ways of doing those handles and different designs and different materials. All right. I'm not going to get into a huge long discussion about this, but I will say I like G10 or micarta. I don't have an example of micarta with me, but this is G10. This is a sort of a carbon fiber sticker over G10. You can get actual carbon fiber handles as well. This knife has an FRN or GRN, some kind of these are all some kind of reinforced plastic. Okay, so this is, FRN, which is fiber reinforced nylon. You can get GRN, which is glass reinforced nylon. All it is, it's like fiberglass. Okay, you've seen fiberglass before. You've got some fibers, you add a resin, and there are a number of variations of that. Even G10 and micarta are kind of related to that process. You're taking some kind of material, you're adding a resin, and it's going to harden and form into something else. So that kind of I'm speeding up just a little bit, but let me just say there's tons of materials. There's wood. There's this material is, I can't remember what they call it, like True Tech or something, but this is a paper fiber with a resin instead of G10 or FRN. So there, like, the material options go on and on, as do the handle finishes. So all these knives, in a second I'll be able to say this, so all of these knives are titanium handles, but you can see they all look very different depending on the finish that's put on the titanium. Let me now talk about the thing that I kind of care most about when it comes to handles, and that is comfort. So this is machined to be kind of rounded, and it's a little larger and hand filling, making this very comfortable. This, because it's just kind of square slabs of titanium, isn't quite as comfortable. It's still pretty good though. Okay. Now we're going to move away from our titanium discussion to comfort. This handle is the most comfortable one on the table. You can see it's quite large. Everything is rounded. I've got tons of real estate. And this is a very comfortable handle because it's so big and just so rounded. Now, guess what? There's a trade-off. And you can sort of see that trade-off right here. Okay, of all these knives, this one's the most comfortable, but it's also the most difficult to carry around. And since your pocket knife is in your pocket more than in your hand, all right, a lot of people are going to say, well, I would prefer something thinner that's not noticeable in pocket. All right, and that is an absolutely 100% legitimate choice. You just have to realize that there's some kind of balance being struck here. All right, in terms of construction, we've pretty well already covered. This has liners. They happen to be aluminum. These, of course, being titanium. This one has a backspacer, no liners of any kind. This one has standoffs. We've already talked about the standoffs. A handle like this, it's called a frame lock handle, doesn't always have to be in titanium. It just so happens that these are. You can also get them in stainless steel. All right, so now that we've covered all of that stuff, let's take 5 minutes at the end and talk a little bit about buying. Man, this is going to be a long video. Who knows how long it's going to take me to upload. But the last thing to consider is I'm going out to buy one of these knives. I've looked at, I've looked at this video. I know all about the parts of the knives. I know how the materials work. I know what kind of lock type I like the best. And I've watched maybe one of my or someone else's recommendation videos. So I think the best EDC knife for me is going to be the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. That's what a lot of people pick. Okay, so that it's going to be a great example. Perhaps maybe a Rat 1. This is the one I picked many years ago that sort of got me into this whole mess. So now what am I going to do? Well, you can buy a Paramilitary 2 for $200. or you can buy a paramilitary 2 for like $140. All right. Um, Same is true for Rat Model 1. You can buy a Rat Model 1 for like 40 bucks, 50 bucks, 35 bucks, or 70. All right. I've seen them listed at retailers for all of those prices. So that should indicate to you that what you don't want to do is just go to the first store that you find. Okay. Here is a Benchmade Crooked River, another favorite knife of mine. This one's been modified, so it's breaking the rules a little bit and getting into a different area of discussion that we're not going to deal with. But again, you can pay a lot for a Crooked River or you can pay a little, and there are a number of things to watch out for. So the first thing you want to do is shop around. Go look at all the knife stores you can think of. A good starting list would be Blade HQ, Knife Center, Knife Works, Warriors and Wonders, White Mountain Knives, Southern Edge Knife Works. By the way, I have discount codes for Southern Edge Knife Works and White Mountain Knives. Also, Amazon can be an option, eBay can be an option, but you need to be careful on those sites as there's quite a problem with fakes there. The other option that we haven't talked about is buying on the secondary market. And again, there are lots of good options for that. You can go to Blade forums, you can go to various Facebook pages, you can go to one of my favorite Facebook pages is Canadian Knife and Gear. That's where I spend the most time talking about knives and sharing stuff about knives. So I recommend you check them out. All right. The main thing to say about buying on the secondary market is, number one, if you're new to this, all I can say is, look, if you're new to this, just spend some time on these sites before jumping in and starting buying stuff. Okay, you want to kind of get to know these people, watch some transactions go through, see who people talk about, make sure that there's just nothing sketchy, nothing that makes you uncomfortable. And for me, I would look. There's so many stories about people getting taken for a ride, selling and buying and trading knives. So just be very careful, right? Think of every knife deal as if you're making it on Craigslist, right? Craigslist sort of has the worst reputation for making deals. So just imagine you're always on Craigslist. And so you've got to be super duper careful. And I have other videos that are all about that. So that's what I would say. Shop around. Even on the secondary market, you really need to shop around. That can be a real challenge. Okay, just because, let's say, okay, here's a Para-2. Let's say, hey, I went to Blade HQ. Para-2s are 150 bucks. So I went over to Blade forums and I found this guy selling this one for 120. Seems like a good deal to me, and it probably is. Okay, but I'm going to recommend that you spend a little more time looking around Blade forums to see what everybody else on Blade forums is selling this knife for. If you're not on Blade forums, if you're on a Facebook page, go to the other Facebook pages you know about. Look around, especially on the secondary market. Value is a bit debatable, so make sure you do your due diligence and figure out what people are selling this for before you buy one and before you go to sell yours. Maybe you bought this, you didn't like it, and now you want this knife. And you have a plan to sell this and use the money to get one of these. Great. That's what everybody does. Just, again, make sure you do your research and offer this at a fair price, or it's just not going to sell. People will look at it and go, oh, this guy has no idea what this knife is actually worth. Okay. So hopefully that is of some benefit to you. We've covered a ton of stuff. I know that. I'll try to put timestamps in, but man, that takes a lot of time, and I don't usually have that kind of time to invest in a video. I don't even have the 40 minutes that I've spent on this, but I felt like it was worthwhile putting all of this information in one place. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing, commenting. Go ahead and I'll put a link down below to Southern Edge Knife Works as well as to White Mountain Knives. Those are both sources that I think are very good and where I do have a discount code so you can save yourself a little bit of money that way. Again, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.